Today we are going to start learning how to solve quadratic equations algebraically, and we're actually going to focus on how to factor when we're doing that. So we're going to use a lot of the stuff that we learned in the last, a couple units ago with factoring. So let's go ahead and get started. Quadratic functions can also be solved without the graph. So remember in the last lesson you learned how to look at the graph, find your x-intercepts, and those were your solutions. When the equation is written in factored form, we can use something called the zero product property. What you need to remember is if we multiply two things together and the answer is 0, that means at least one of those two things had to be 0. So what we're going to do is set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So pretty easy. Notice each of these equations is y equals, but they're all in factored form. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and solve each of them by setting each of the factors. So we're going to take this here, take this here, and set each of those equal to 0. So we're going to do 0 equals x plus 4, and 0 equals x minus 6. Okay, so I have two parts there. We're going to solve each one. We're going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I get negative 4 for the first one. And we're going to add 6 to both sides. So we're going to get 6 for the second one. So those are my two answers. We get negative 4 and 6. Okay. The next one, notice that there aren't two sets of parentheses, but there are still two parts. This is actually one group here. Whoops. This is one part here. So we're going to do 0 equals x, and 0 equals x minus 8. If 0 equals x, we can't actually do anything to solve that. That's our answer, so we don't have to do anything else there. We're going to go ahead and add 8 to both sides so that we get 8 equals x. Okay, so my two answers then are x equals 0 and 8. Next two, same idea. Take each of the factors, set them equal to 0. The only thing is there's going to be some extra steps here. So we're going to do 0 equals 2x plus 8, and 0 equals 3x minus 1. So if we subtract 8 from both sides, we're going to get negative 8 equals 2x. And then divide by 2 on both sides, we get negative 4 equals x. For the second one, we're going to add 1 to both sides. So we get 1 equals 3x. And then we're going to divide by 3. Since we can't divide 1 by 3, we're going to leave it as 1/3. So my two answers for this one are negative 4 and 1/3. Okay. Last problem on this page. Same thing. Take your two factors, set them equal to 0. So 0 equals 5x minus 4, and 0 equals 6x plus 2. We're going to add 4 to both sides to get 4 equals 5x, and then divide by 5. Since we can't divide that, we're going to get 4/5. Second one, subtract 2 from both sides. You get negative 2 equals 6x. If you divide by 6 on both sides, we can reduce it to get negative 1/3 equals x. So two answers are 4/5, and move this out of the way, and negative 1/3. Okay, so our final answer is 4/5 and negative 1/3. So like I said, our goal here is to have this in factored form, set each part equal to 0, and then solve each one. So you should typically get two answers. Not always. Sometimes you'll get one. But that's our goal here. Now, sometimes these aren't given to us in factored form. So there are some steps that you need to do before you can actually use the zero product property. The first step is to make sure the equation is equal to 0. Most common mistake that students make is they forget this first step. Second step is to factor out any GCFs. which we're not going to have to do today. And then you're either going to use x or AC split to factor and then solve using the zero product property. Okay, so like I said, we're not going to do any GCFs in this lesson. We'll do those in another video. Okay, so looking at these two problems, solve each quadratic equation by factoring. Now, first step is to make sure that you have an equal 0 in the problem. Okay, so if we have this equal 0 here, we're in pretty good shape. The next part is to go ahead and factor the left side. Okay, so notice there's nothing in front of my n squared. So since there's nothing in front, I can't divide anything out. I'm going to go ahead and make my x right away. I put a negative 28 in top and a negative 3 on bottom. So I'm looking for two numbers to multiply to give me negative 28, add up to negative 3. And I know that those are negative 7 and positive 4. Now, think back to a couple units ago. Since there's nothing out front here, I can go right to my parentheses. So I'm going to have an n minus 7 and an n plus 4. And that still equals 0. Okay, this is now in factored form, so I need to make sure if I have an equal sign there and it says solve in the directions that I actually solve it. So we're going to do n minus 7 equals 0 and n plus 4 equals 0. So if I add 7 to both sides, I get 7. If I subtract 4 from both sides, I get negative 4. So my two answers are 7 and negative 4. Okay, let's do one more. We are going to look at this, make sure it's equal to 0, which it is. There's nothing in front here. We're going to go ahead and make our x. That means 35 goes on top and 12 goes on bottom. So the two numbers that multiply to give us 35 and add up to 12 are 5 and 7. Since there's nothing out front, we're going to go right to our parentheses. We have k plus 5 and k plus 7. And we're going to set each part equal to 0. So k plus 5 equals 0 and k plus 7 equals 0. And solve. Subtract 5 from both sides, subtract 7 from both sides, and we get negative 5 and negative 7. Now, when you're doing these, the easiest way to check is to put these in parentheses and plug them back in and make sure you get 0. So you're going to do negative 7 squared plus 12 times negative 7 plus 35, and you should get 0 if you plug that into your calculator. Okay, let's move on and do a couple more. Okay, so next two, notice there's a number in front for each of those, but they're still both equal to 0. So since I have the equal 0 there, we're going to go ahead and use our x. But because I have this number out front, I need to multiply 3 times 16. So 3 times 16 is 48, and that goes on the top of my x. 26 goes on the bottom. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 48, add up 26, and that would be 24 and 2. Now, since we had this number out front here, remember we need to do AC split. So my A stays the same. My B splits into 2, so 24A and 2A. We're going to make two groups and factor out our GCFs. So I can divide both of those by 3A, which leaves me with A plus 8. Okay, 24 divided by 3 is 8. And in the second group, I can take out a 2. So that leaves me with A plus 8. Remember, if these two groups match, we're in good shape. If you're in my first hour, Miss Schuyler would tell you that you're twinning. So we're going to bring that A plus 8 out, and then my 3A plus 2 would make my next group. And then we need to continue going on and solving. So we're going to do A plus 8 equals 0, and 3A plus 2 equals 0. So if we subtract 8 from both sides, we get negative 8. Subtract 2 from both sides, we get negative 2. and then divide by 3, you get negative 2/3. So our two answers here are negative 8 and negative 2/3. Okay, so that one definitely takes longer because you have to use the AC split. Still works out. Let's do one more like that. We're going to go ahead and make sure it's equal to 0, which it is. And then since there's a number out front, when I do my x, I need to do 4 times 10 for the top, which is 40, and 13 goes on the bottom. So the two numbers that multiply to give me 40 and add up to 13 are 5 and 8. So using AC split, 4x squared plus 5x plus 8x plus 10 equals 0. We're going to go ahead and make two groups here. So in my first group, I can only take out an x, which leaves me with 4x plus 5. In my second group, I can take out a 2, or divide by 2. So when I do that, I get 4x plus 5. And since these two groups match, we're in good shape. And x plus 2 makes my second group. And we're going to set each part equal to 0. So 4x plus 5 equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0. So if we subtract from both sides, and subtract 2 from both sides, so let me write right there. Let's try that again. So we get x equals negative 2, and I'm not sure why it won't let me write my negative 2 there. That should be an x. So my answers are negative 5/4 and negative 2. Okay. All right, there's some practice there. Last one we're going to do is only different because we don't have a 0 there. Okay, so one quick step that we need to do before we start anything here is to go ahead and start by subtracting 2 from both sides. And if I do that, notice those both cancel, which happens sometimes. Okay, in this one, and I just told you at the beginning we wouldn't do any GCFs, but here's one. Notice that I can take a b out of each of those. So if I take a b out, I'm left with 3b plus 1. I actually can't factor anymore. So I need to set each part equal to 0. So I'm going to do b equals 0 and 3b plus 1 equals 0 and solve that second one. Okay, so we still have our two answers. We get 0 and negative 1/3. Only difference in this problem is since we didn't have a 0 on that right side, or at all, it has to have an equal 0 there. This here means we need to subtract first to move it over, or add, to cancel it out, and then you'd be good. Okay. Try your guided practice problems, have them checked. If you have any questions, let me know, and then you can practice your homework. Have a great day.